Up next is Ray Flournoy, a VP of Product at Etsy. Ray really knows internationalization, having led teams at Etsy, Adobe, and Yahoo Search, as well as being the Vice President of the Association of Machine Translation in the Americas. If you are working on a product with multiple languages and locations, or might in the future, you should really enjoy Ray's talk.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming to listen to my talk. My name is Ray Flournoy. I'm one of the VPs of product at Etsy, and the product areas that I oversee include payments, member services, trust and safety, tax compliance, legal compliance, and international. But international is where I started out, and in many ways it's my first love. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about internationalization, and specifically about some of the fundamental decisions that we made, some of the basic considerations that we had to think about at Etsy as we approached the task of internationalizing our product and building for a global audience. So to set some context, let me give you some facts about Etsy. As of the first half of this year, we had over 60 million active buyers and over 3 million active sellers. And the inventory on our site is currently over 72 million items. Actually, as we gear up for the holidays, I'm sure that number is much higher. About 38% of our sales involve a non-US buyer or a non-US seller. And we have members in just about every country in the world. And to serve that global member base, we translate our site and app into 11 languages, and we support at different levels 29 currencies. So as we look to grow outside of the US, one of the first things we had to decide was how to organize our product team to address a global audience. So if you look around the tech world in the US in particular, you'll see often two common models for internationalizing products. One where international is a separate product team, and the second where you could say all teams are international. So let's take a look at both of these models. In the first, where international is separate, here all of your core teams build for your core market, and that's usually the US and usually in US English. And then after a product is built, you throw it over the fence to the international team. And that team is given the responsibility for internationalizing that product and for localizing it for all of the different markets that you want to launch in. And so in this model, I think the minuses are pretty obvious. First of all, the US and the non-US product offering very quickly becomes out of sync. New products and new features might be delayed by months or even years to roll out to your different markets, and then you might have a very different product offering as you look at different markets around the globe. But in addition to this, internationalization isn't baked in from the beginning. So you might have to sort of tear your product apart and re-architect it later on to allow it to be internationalized for other markets. But there are pluses to this model as well. In the international team, you end up having strong advocates for international member needs, international market needs. And in addition, you will then be able to concentrate knowledge and expertise about internationalization within this team. They become the experts within your company. In contrast to this, there's a model where you tell every product team, you're international. Essentially, everybody has to serve international. And here, each team is given responsibility for a global release for their products and features. And there is no separate internationalization team. And the pluses here are that you're much closer to this ultimate goal of global SIMship, global simultaneous shipment of your product and features. And then in this model also, hopefully, internationalization issues are baked into your products from the start. But on the minus side, we are all product managers, and so I think we're familiar with the struggle to get as much done with as few resources as possible in as little time as possible. And when you come up against deadlines, you often have to cut features, you have to cut scope. And unfortunately, in this model, US needs often tend to drown out non-US ones. So when requirements are cut, when scope is cut, it often ends up being the non-US requirements are the first ones that are cut. In addition, since every team is given a responsibility for internationalization, you often end up with a model where every team might be reinventing their solutions and not learning from each other. And you end up with a hodgepodge of different approaches to internationalization. And then finally, you don't end up with a body of expertise in internationalization. There's no one advocating for the international user and nobody collecting this knowledge and expertise about internationalization. So at Etsy, we've settled on sort of a hybrid approach between these two extremes. And that takes the form of a product team within our org, which we call the Localization and Translation team. So here, every core product team is given a global mandate. Your product, your feature we expect it to be built to serve a global audience. But at the same time, there is within the org this localization translation team, and they exist to understand and advocate for international user needs. They build tools, they build infrastructure and a platform that other teams can leverage. And most importantly, they build up a body of knowledge and expertise around internationalization. So this team then works closely with all the other teams. They cooperate with them and they collaborate with them to help everybody better serve international markets. So that's the product side. Another fundamental question we discussed was around our design philosophy for building an international website and product. So again, you can look around the web and see other examples. And if you look at websites for different international brands, you'll see different approaches to how much they specifically allow the experience to vary by market. In the examples that I'm showing here, I'm mostly concentrating on brand marketing, but I think the ideas extend to the products themselves as well. So some brands give tremendous control to each market, and you'll see that the site varies not just in the content, but also in the functioning of the site. So in the examples on the screen, these are taken from the Coca-Cola website, all on the same day, but in 3 different countries. So you'll see in the US site, there's a lifestyle image front and center, so the marketing content varies a lot by market. In the Brazilian site, it has a product featured which actually was not available in the US at that time. So again, the products that are being shown are varied a lot by market. And then finally at the bottom on the Japanese site, at this time they had a sweepstakes running. So a large amount of the functionality of the website was given over to supporting that sweepstakes and an app integration at the time. So for other brands, the functioning of the site is basically the same, but only the marketing imagery will vary. So again, these are examples all taken from the Nike website on the same day, but in 3 different countries. And here you see in the US, a product image is front and center. In the Dutch site, it's all orange in order to convey that national identity very strongly. And then on the Japanese site, I actually wish I'd grabbed a moving image. They had this very trippy animation. It had nothing to do with product. It was all really just about the brand feel. So here, the marketing imagery very drastically by country. But if you look at the menus and the functioning of the site, it is essentially identical in all of these countries. So at Etsy, we are a global marketplace, and part of our fundamental identity is this idea that we are connecting people, buyers and sellers, from around the globe. And so I think this fundamental identity really drives a basic idea within our product design. As much as possible, we strive to have a universal experience for members in all countries. So we are one marketplace for everybody to come visit. However, in spite of this, we do realize there are times when we either have to or need to or want to vary the experience by country. So that leads into the last point of my talk, and that is when we think about wanting to localize the product for a specific market, for adding a feature or a functionality that's different in a different market, how do we decide when to do it and whether it's a good idea or not? So let's talk a little bit about what is localization and the different elements of localization. So when people think about localization, the first thing that usually jumps to mind is translation. And we definitely, that is a top priority for us. At Etsy, we translate the site and our apps into 2 different varieties of English, as well as Dutch, French, German, Italian, Japanese, and Spanish. And we recently also added Polish, Russian, and Portuguese as supported languages. But in addition to this, other times our product offering is driven by basic infrastructural requirements. So we are an e-commerce site. So things like payment systems, shipping partners, those are things which are necessarily country specific. And so we have to support them, different ones in different countries. And then in addition to this, there are other fundamental requirements around usability that we just have to get right. So questions around displaying prices and dates, how people can enter addresses, those are market norms that we have to follow in order to show that we understand basic localization hygiene. And that's one way to get basic user trust. Do we look like we know what we're doing? Do you as a seller trust us with your business? Do you as a buyer trust us with your money? So those are all just fundamentals that we have to get right. But beyond that, we also want to find the market differences which are less programmatic and which are more difficult to pin down. We want to think about features that maybe are region specific, but which are more about market norms, user preferences. What would be a big help to a buyer or seller in that country? What do people want to see? That's really the next step in building trust. How well do you know me and my preferences? So then how do we as a company, how does Etsy decide when we do understand that well enough to launch a localized feature? So the basic tool that we use is familiar, I'm sure, to every one of you, and that's the A/B experiment. So, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but basically the idea is you have the control, which is your current experiment, and then you randomly assign your users to a variant, and then you track user behavior to see if that variant leads people in the direction you want them to go, to behave the way you want them to behave or not. So the A/B experiment is very useful with internationalization because it's not always obvious, it's not always obvious what people want or what they will find useful. And this is a way for you to understand that better. So these screenshots show an example of a feature that we wanted to launch for our international buyers, and so we launched as an A/B experiment. And that feature is automatic conversion of measurements. Let me take a second to give a little bit of background on this. So this is a feature which is constantly requested. It shows up in the forums. When we do research with both buyers and sellers, they request this. When I go out to talk to sellers around the world in person, they again and again will bring this up. And the fundamental use case that we're trying to address, I think, is obvious. That, a buyer, they want to be able to buy with confidence, regardless of where the seller is located and whatever measurement system they're using. And as a seller, I want to be able to address a worldwide buyer audience, to be able to sell wherever the buyer is located. And so in order to do that, ideally, the measurement systems we use, such as metric or imperial, we would convert automatically, but also other systems of measurement like shoe sizes or ring sizes, we would also do automatic conversion of those. So the use case seemed fairly obvious, and so we came up with the design that you see on the screen. On the left-hand side, this is a listing as a US seller listed it. She uses imperial units located in the US, so she's given the measurements in inches. And on the right-hand side, this is in the variant, this is how we would display that listing to a buyer coming to it, for example, from Europe. So they would see the measurements in metric, in centimeters, and then the original imperial units were in parentheses next to it. Seems very straightforward, seems very obvious. All the information's there. We have the converted amount, we have the original amount just for as a trust signal. It should do well, right? So I'm sure you can guess where the story is going. We launched this A/B experiment, and actually the conversion rate went down. Buyers were less likely to buy when they saw information presented this way. And so this was a surprise to us. And the conclusion here was, first, don't launch the feature as built. So we, of course, did not do that. But then we had to go back to the drawing board and really think about why this did not test the way we were expecting it to. What the possible reasons could have been. Was it that there was like too much information presented in too small a space? It was like information overload. Was using decimal points a bad choice? Did it actually convey an antitrust signal that made buyers trust it less? These were all things that we had to go back to think about. And we, again, had to better understand what our international buyers in this wanted to see in the feature, and went back to the drawing board to see how to address those. So again, A/B testing, it doesn't replace research, and it certainly doesn't replace fundamentally understanding your user. But it does help to validate your ideas and your intuitions, even ones which seem obvious, because for localization, we're talking about people located in other countries, other cultures, maybe using other languages. And our intuitions are not always correct about users in those situations. So that was a quick walk through some of the fundamental decisions and some of the basic considerations that we've made at Etsy as we build for a global audience. Thank you so much for listening, and I would love to hear your stories about and your experiences about building products for a global audience. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And once again, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day here at the conference.